The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and expensive lies. I sat in the corner chair, hands folded in my lap, while my sister Veronica performed what I can only describe as a masterclass in fake grief. Her shoulders shook with perfectly timed sobs. Her voice cracked on cue when she said, "Daddy always told me I was his emotional one, his sensitive girl." The estate attorney, Mr. Pemberton, nodded sympathetically, his expression soft with what looked like genuine concern. Around the polished mahogany table sat our cousins, our aunt, family friends who'd known Dad for decades. Every single one of them watched Veronica with misty eyes, completely captivated by her performance. Then Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat and began reading the will. My name wasn't there. Not for the house I'd helped Dad maintain for 8 years. Not for the savings account I'd watched him build through careful planning. Nothing. Everything went to Veronica. The betrayal burned in my throat, but I stayed perfectly still, watching my sister dab at dry eyes with a tissue she'd probably rehearsed holding at just the right angle. I didn't cry, didn't protest, didn't make a scene. Instead, I watched Veronica wipe away tears that didn't exist, her hand trembling just enough to look genuine, but not enough to smudge her makeup. She'd always been good at performances. School plays, college presentations, even her wedding vows had sounded rehearsed. But this was different. This was calculated cruelty wrapped in grief. As she clutched Mr. Pemberton's hand and thanked him for his kindness during this difficult time, something clicked in my memory. A flash of recognition that made my stomach turn cold. I'd seen this exact scene before, not just the emotion, but the words, the specific phrases. Daddy always said. The hand gesture where she touched her collarbone. The way she paused before saying, emotional. I'd seen this performance already, word for word, gesture for gesture, and suddenly I knew exactly where I'd seen it. My Nest camera. The one still logged into her kitchen from Thanksgiving 3 years ago when I'd helped her set up her smart home system. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my old iPad, the one I used for recipes and grocery lists. My hands shook slightly as I opened the Nest app, half expecting to find nothing. But there it was, still connected. Veronica's kitchen camera, recording faithfully, storing clips in the cloud like a digital witness to everything that happened in that space. I scrolled back through the saved footage, past dinner parties and morning coffee routines, until I found it. 3 weeks before Dad died. There was Veronica, standing in front of her bathroom mirror, tissues in hand, practicing. Daddy always told me I was his emotional one, she said to her reflection, then stopped, shook her head. Started again with slightly different inflection. Daddy always said I was his emotional one, his sensitive girl. She smiled at herself, apparently satisfied, then dabbed at completely dry eyes. I watched her rehearse the entire speech. Every pause, every tremor in her voice, every gesture I'd just witnessed in the lawyer's office. She'd practiced her grief like an actress preparing for opening night. I couldn't stop watching. Clip after clip, day after day, Veronica refined her performance. She practiced hand gestures in front of the mirror, adjusting her posture, testing different levels of emotion. In one recording from 2 weeks before Dad's death, she worked on the exact moment she'd touched the lawyer's hand. Too aggressive looked manipulative. Too gentle looked weak. She settled on a brief squeeze with downcast eyes, perfect vulnerability. In another clip, she timed her breathing, creating the illusion of barely controlled sobs. She'd pause, take a shaky breath, continue speaking. Professional actors would have been impressed by her technique. But what made my blood run cold was the calculation behind it. She wasn't grieving, she was performing grief, rehearsing manipulation, preparing to steal everything Dad had worked for. And she'd done it with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Someone who'd planned this long before Dad took his final breath. I saved every single clip to 3 different locations, my nursing training kicking in. Document everything. Evidence matters. I thought back to the will reading, seeing it now through different eyes. Veronica had owned that room completely. Our cousin Bethany had put her arm around Veronica's shoulders, whispering comfort. Uncle Frank had actually apologized to her for tearing up himself. Even Mr. Pemberton, a lawyer who probably saw grief performances daily, had seemed genuinely moved by her display. And me? I'd sat silent in the corner, The daughter who apparently didn't care enough to cry, who must have had some falling out with Dad to be excluded so completely from his will. I could see it in their faces, the judgment forming, the quiet daughter, the cold one, the one who probably deserved to be written out. Veronica had painted me as the villain without saying a single word against me. Her performance alone had convinced everyone that this outcome was fair, even expected. She'd won the room before I'd even understood we were in a competition. She's already won, I'd thought at the time, watching her accept condolences. And I'm the villain now. But there had been warning signs I'd ignored. 3 months before he died, Dad had called me from the hospital during one of his routine checkups. His voice had sounded confused, uncertain. "Ruthie, honey, remind me again why you wanted me to sign that paper about the house." I'd frozen in the middle of folding laundry, my phone pressed to my ear. "What paper, Dad? I never asked you to sign anything." Long pause. Background noise of hospital equipment beeping. "Oh, maybe I'm remembering wrong. Getting old, sweetheart." He'd laughed it off. Changed the subject to the terrible hospital coffee. I'd dismissed it as confusion from his medications, maybe mixing me up with Veronica. Now I realized what had actually happened. Veronica had told him I wanted something signed, had probably presented documents as if they came from me, using my name to make him comfortable. I should have pressed him for details, should have driven to the hospital immediately. Instead, I'd let it go, trusted that everything was fine. That was my first mistake. The memories came flooding back now, each one more damning than the last. Dad's final hospital stay, the one where the stroke left him struggling to speak clearly. I'd been there every day, but Veronica had made sure she was there every night, when fewer people were around to witness whatever she was doing. I remembered walking in once to find her whispering to his nurse, holding a clipboard, smiling in that warm way she'd perfected over years of getting what she wanted. "It's just paperwork," she'd said when she noticed me, her voice light and casual. "Insurance stuff. You know how complicated it all gets." The nurse had nodded, looking sympathetic. Dad had been sleeping, his mouth slightly open, the left side of his face still slack from the stroke. I'd accepted Veronica's explanation because why would I question it? She was my sister. We were supposed to be on the same team, both trying to help Dad through his illness. Now I wondered what was on that clipboard. What had she made him sign when his speech was too slurred to protest, when his mind was clouded by medication and fear? The morning after the funeral, I was sitting in my apartment, still in my black dress, when my phone buzzed with a photo from Cousin Bethany. "Look what Veronica got herself," the text read. "She deserves something nice after everything she's been through." The image showed Veronica standing next to a brand new pearl white Lexus, her smile radiant, no trace of yesterday's grief on her perfectly made-up face. The caption on her social media post read, "A gift to myself for surviving this loss. Life is too short not to celebrate the moments we have. Dad would want me to be happy." I stared at that photo for a long time, then took a screenshot. Saved it with the date and timestamp clearly visible. The funeral had been yesterday. Dad had been in the ground for less than 24 hours. And Veronica was celebrating with a $60,000 car, paid for with money that should have been divided between us, from a house that should have been half mine. I labeled the screenshot Exhibit A and created a folder on my laptop titled Evidence. Some people might call it petty. I called it preparation. I made a decision that morning. No confrontations, no dramatic scenes, no angry phone calls that Veronica could record and use to paint me as unstable, bitter, jealous. I would become exactly what everyone already thought I was, the quiet daughter, the one who accepted her fate with dignity, the one who moved on without making waves. But quiet didn't mean inactive. It meant strategic. I started collecting everything. Bank statements from the joint account Dad and I had opened years ago for household expenses, receipts from the contractors I'd hired to fix his roof, replace his water heater, update his electrical panel, handwriting samples from every birthday card, every grocery list, every note Dad had ever written me. I organized it all meticulously, creating timelines, cross-referencing dates, building a picture of the truth that Veronica thought she'd successfully buried. People already thought I was cold for not crying at the will reading. Let them think it. Let them see me as the bitter sister who couldn't be happy for Veronica. I'd rather be underestimated than unprepared. 2 weeks later, I met Mrs. Kowalski for coffee. She'd been Dad's neighbor for 15 years, had helped me coordinate his care during the final months. We sat in a corner booth at her favorite diner, and she stirred her tea absently while we talked about how much we missed him. Then, almost casually, she said something that made my heart stop. I thought it was strange when Veronica mentioned she had power of attorney. I didn't even know your father had set that up. I kept my face perfectly neutral, though my mind was racing. Oh, when did she mention that? Mrs. Kowalski thought for a moment. Maybe 2 months before he passed. She came by to pick up his mail one day, said she was handling all his legal affairs now. I assumed you both knew about it. I smiled, thanked her for meeting me, paid for both our meals. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot and added this information to my growing file. Power of attorney. 2 months before Dad died. Right after his stroke, when he could barely speak, couldn't write clearly. When it would have been so easy to guide his hand across a document he couldn't read. The memory surfaced like evidence rising to the top of murky water. 6 weeks before Dad's death, I'd driven to Veronica's house to drop off some medical files I'd picked up from his doctor's office. She hadn't answered the door, but I'd seen a man in an expensive suit leaving through her side entrance, carrying a leather briefcase. Professional. Formal. Clearly not a friend. At the time, I'd assumed he was a contractor or maybe her financial advisor. She was always hiring people for something, always upgrading, improving, investing in her perfect life. I hadn't thought twice about it. Now, I called the number for the estate attorney's office and asked the receptionist a simple question. I'm trying to remember the date of my last appointment with Mr. Pemberton. Could you check your records? She found it easily. The exact date I'd seen the man leaving Veronica's house. Actually, the receptionist said helpfully, that was a house call. Mr. Pemberton went to meet with you and your sister at her residence. I'd never been at that meeting. Had never been invited. Veronica had met with Dad's estate attorney alone at her house while Dad was too sick to attend. And somehow, after that meeting, the will had changed. I forced myself to remember the last day I saw Dad alive. He'd been tired, so tired his eyes kept drifting closed mid-conversation. The hospice nurse had increased his pain medication, and he was floating in that space between sleep and consciousness. Mostly peaceful, but occasionally confused. Veronica had been there, sitting in the chair next to his bed, holding his hand in what looked like a tender moment of sisterly devotion. I'd stepped out to call his doctor with a question about his medication schedule. When I came back, Veronica was pressing a pen into Dad's hand, her voice soft and soothing. Just one more for the bank, Daddy. One more signature and we're all done. His hand had moved slowly, shakily, making some kind of mark on a paper I couldn't see. He hadn't asked what it was. Hadn't even opened his eyes. Just signed because his daughter asked him to, trusted her, because why wouldn't he? I should have questioned it then. Should have asked to see the document. But I'd been so focused on his comfort, on making sure he wasn't in pain, that I'd missed what was happening right in front of me. The Nest footage became my obsession. Every night after work, I'd scroll through more recordings, finding new evidence of Veronica's planning. In one clip from a month before Dad's death, she was on the phone, the speaker function letting me hear both sides of the conversation. Her friend Kayla's voice came through clearly. Are you sure this is okay? I mean, doesn't Ruth need to know? Veronica had laughed, that familiar tinkling sound she used when she wanted to seem carefree. He probably didn't even know what he was signing, but it's legal, right? That's what matters. The lawyer said as long as he signed it, it counts. A pause. Then Kayla again, sounding uncertain. I guess, but still. Veronica had cut her off. Don't worry about Ruth. She'll be fine. She's always been the practical one. She doesn't need the money like I do. I saved that clip with shaking hands, labeled it carefully, added it to my growing collection of proof. People forget that cameras remember everything. That digital files don't care about performance or charm. They just record the truth, frame by frame, second by second. I went to Dad's house, the one that was legally Veronica's now, but still felt like home to me. She'd given me a week to collect my personal items, Generous of her. I walked through rooms filled with memories, past the chair where Dad used to read the newspaper, past the kitchen table where we'd eaten Sunday dinners for decades. In his office, I found what I was looking for. The paper shredder was nearly full, and sitting on top was a half-destroyed envelope with legal letterhead. The return address was from a law firm in Veronica's city, not the local attorney Dad had used for years. I pulled it out carefully, laid the strips on the desk, began piecing them together with tape like a puzzle. It took an hour, but I reconstructed enough to read the date and partial contents. A letter about estate planning services, dated the same day Dad had fallen and hit his head, the incident that led to his final hospitalization. The coincidence felt too perfect. Too convenient. I photographed the reconstructed envelope from every angle, then left it exactly where I'd found it. Let Veronica think it was destroyed. Let her feel safe. The bank manager was sympathetic when I called, explaining I needed to understand Dad's final financial situation for my own records. She couldn't give me account details without authorization, but she could confirm basic information. Yes, there was significant activity in the final weeks. Miss Veronica handled all of that personally. My stomach clenched. How much activity? A pause. Professional discretion warring with human sympathy. I probably shouldn't, but given the circumstances, I can say that the primary savings account was closed 2 weeks before your father's passing. The funds were transferred to a new account with only Miss Veronica's name. 2 weeks. When Dad was barely conscious, when he couldn't have possibly authorized such a transfer himself. Miss Veronica had power of attorney, the manager continued. So it was all properly documented. I'm sorry for your loss. I thanked her, ended the call, and added this information to my timeline. The picture was becoming clearer. Veronica hadn't just manipulated the will. She'd been systematically transferring assets, closing accounts, consolidating everything under control before Dad even died. Late one night, I logged into Dad's old email account. He'd given me the password years ago when he first got confused by technology, asking me to help him manage his online bills. The inbox was mostly spam now, automated messages from services he'd subscribed to over the years. But I wasn't looking at his inbox. I went to the sent folder, started scrolling backward through time. There, 3 months before his death. An email sent at 2:47 a.m., addressed to Veronica, with a PDF attachment titled Power of Attorney Template. I opened it with trembling fingers. A blank legal form, ready to be filled out. Dad hadn't sent this. He'd been asleep at 2:47 a.m., his pain medication knocking him out by 9 every evening. Someone had accessed his email account, forwarded themselves a legal document, made it look like it came from him. The metadata on the PDF showed it had been created on Veronica's computer, then uploaded to Dad's email before being sent. Clumsy digital forgery, but probably enough to fool anyone who didn't look closely. I saved everything, screenshots and files, building my case one piece of evidence at a time. Veronica had always underestimated me. We'd grown up in the same house, but we'd been raised differently. She was the charming one, the social butterfly who could talk her way into or out of anything. I was the quiet one, the caretaker, the daughter who stayed home while Veronica traveled the world. She'd built her life on being underestimated too, but in a different way. She used people's low expectations to exceed them, to dazzle them with her charm. I used low expectations as camouflage. People who thought I was simple, uncomplicated, easy to overlook, never saw me coming. That was her mistake. She thought I'd accept the will reading, maybe complain to a few family members, ultimately move on because that's what quiet people did. She'd forgotten who taught her how to be patient, who'd shown her that sometimes the best strategy was to wait, watch, and strike when your opponent thought the game was already won. Dad had taught me that during chess games on Sunday afternoons. Patience, Ruthie, he'd say. Let them think they're winning. I requested a meeting with Mr. Pemberton, the estate attorney. His secretary seemed surprised, but scheduled me in without hesitation. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed professionally, my face calm and friendly. When Mr. Pemberton greeted me in his office, I shook his hand warmly and thanked him for his time. I just wanted to understand the process better, I said, settling into the chair across from his massive desk. I know Veronica handled most of the legal details, but I'd like to know how everything worked, for my own peace of mind. He relaxed visibly, probably relieved I wasn't there to contest the will. For the next 30 minutes, he explained estate law, probate procedures, the importance of proper documentation. His answers were smooth, practiced, like he'd rehearsed them, like someone had prepped him for difficult questions. "Your sister was very organized," he said at one point. "She made this whole process much easier than it usually is." I smiled. "I'm sure she did. When did she first contact you about Dad's estate?" He checked his notes. Approximately 4 months before his passing. She wanted to make sure everything was in order. My phone was recording the entire conversation, tucked in my purse with the microphone positioned perfectly. I'd practiced at home, tested the audio quality, made sure it would capture every word clearly. Mr. Pemberton never suspected a thing. Why would he? I was just the grieving daughter, trying to understand what had happened. "Veronica mentioned something about a last-minute addendum," I said casually, as if this was common knowledge. "How does that usually work?" He nodded, pleased to explain. "Yes, the addendum was added about 2 weeks before your father's passing. Your sister brought it in personally, already signed by your father. It clarified some specific bequests and reinforced her role as primary beneficiary." He smiled, professional and polished. "Your sister handled it beautifully, very thorough." I maintained my pleasant expression while my mind raced. An addendum. Signed by Dad during his final weeks, when he could barely hold a pen. Brought in by Veronica personally, without me present, without witnesses I knew. "That must have been difficult for her," I said sympathetically, "handling legal documents while Dad was so sick." "She was remarkably composed," Mr. Pemberton agreed. "Remarkably composed, remarkably rehearsed." That night, I spread everything across my dining room table. Birthday cards from Dad going back 20 years. Grocery lists he'd written in his shaky handwriting. Medical consent forms from his various procedures. Get well cards he'd sent me when I had surgery. Every piece of paper that contained his signature, his handwriting, his distinctive way of forming letters. Then I pulled out copies of the will and the addendum Mr. Pemberton had mentioned. I'm not a handwriting expert, but I didn't need to be. The difference was obvious. Dad's real signature slanted left, the result of a childhood injury to his right hand that never healed quite right. The letters were uneven, shaky in his later years, but consistently so. The signature on the addendum? Perfectly straight, clean. The loops on the letters were too round, too practiced. This wasn't the writing of an 80-year-old man dying from cancer. This was someone trying to forge his signature, and doing a mediocre job of it. I photographed everything side by side, created comparison documents, highlighting the differences. Not his signature, not his handwriting, not his choice. My phone rang at 1 a.m. Cousin Denise, Dad's niece, her voice thick with tears and insomnia. "Ruth, I can't sleep. Something's been bothering me since the funeral." I sat up in bed, turned on the lamp. "What is it?" She took a shaky breath. "At the hospital maybe 2 weeks before Uncle Howard died, I stopped by to visit. Veronica was there in the hallway on her phone. I heard her practicing something, like rehearsing lines." My heart started pounding. What kind of lines? It sounded like a eulogy, but Uncle Howard was still alive. She kept saying, "Daddy always said I was his emotional one," over and over, trying different ways to say it. At the time I thought maybe she was just preparing herself, processing grief early. But now? She trailed off. "Now it feels wrong. Calculated." I closed my eyes, gratitude flooding through me. "Denise, would you be willing to write down exactly what you remember? Dates, times, what you heard?" "Yes, God, yes." I felt so guilty for not saying something sooner. Another witness. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. I showed up at Veronica's house the next week, carrying a casserole dish she'd left at Dad's house months ago. She answered the door in yoga pants and a designer t-shirt, her hair perfect, her smile bright. "Ruth, come in, come in." I followed her to the kitchen, making small talk about the weather, about work, about anything except what I was really there for. She set the casserole dish on the island, started talking about her plans to renovate Dad's house before selling it. While she talked, I let my eyes wander, taking in details. And there, next to her coffee maker, was a black leather journal. The same one I'd seen in the nest footage, the one she'd used to practice her grief performance. I should get going, I said, glancing at my watch. But could I use your bathroom first? Of course. You know where it is. The moment she turned away, I pulled out my phone, flipped the journal open, started photographing pages. Line by line, she'd written out her performance. When they ask about Ruth, look down, appear reluctant to speak negatively. Let the silence say what I can't. My hands shook as I captured image after image. Mention how hard this has been. Touch chest for authenticity. Every manipulation documented in her own handwriting. The Nest footage from 2 months before Dad's death showed Veronica in her kitchen, but this time, she wasn't practicing grief. She was practicing for court. Pacing back and forth in front of her refrigerator, gesturing dramatically, speaking to an imaginary judge. Your Honor, I loved my father deeply. I was there when no one else was, managing his care, handling his affairs, making sure he was comfortable in his final days. She paused, tried again with more emotion. I was there when no one else was, when Ruth was too busy with her own life to visit. She said my name like a weapon, testing how it would sound from her mouth in a courtroom. Tried different inflections. Sad, disappointed, reluctantly honest. In another clip, she practiced answering questions about the will. My father's wishes were clear. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of, that I had the resources to continue the charitable work he valued. She smiled at her reflection in the window. Ruth will try to twist this, to make it about money, but it's about honoring our father's legacy. I saved every second, my hands steady now, my purpose crystal clear. The court date arrived 6 months after Dad's death. I'd filed a contest of the will 3 months earlier, and the legal process had ground forward with agonizing slowness. I arrived at the courthouse in a simple navy dress, no jewelry, minimal makeup. Veronica wore black, her grief costume perfectly assembled. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and old wood. Mr. Pemberton sat at Veronica's table, whispering reassurances. My attorney, a sharp woman named Miss Torres who specialized in estate fraud, sat beside me reviewing her notes. When it was Veronica's turn to testify, I watched her transform. The confident woman who'd arrived became fragile, vulnerable, overcome with emotion. She told the judge about Dad's final months, about how she'd sacrificed everything to care for him, about how he'd made his wishes clear, that she should inherit the estate. Her voice trembled exactly as it had in her rehearsals. She touched her chest at precisely the right moments, and the judge watched her with what looked like sympathy. My turn came. I stayed calm, factual, answered every question simply and directly. No tears, no drama, just truth. When the judge asked why I was contesting the will, I said simply, because my father didn't write it. Miss Torres stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that I believe will clarify the circumstances surrounding this will. She handed the judge a USB drive. This contains video evidence obtained legally from security footage. It shows the defendant, Veronica Howard, rehearsing the testimony she just gave this court. Word for word, gesture for gesture. 40 separate rehearsals over the course of 2 months, all recorded before our client's father passed away. Veronica's face went white. Mr. Pemberton half stood, objecting, but the judge held up a hand. She inserted the USB into the laptop on her bench, turned the screen slightly so the courtroom could see. And there was Veronica, captured in high definition, standing in her kitchen. Let me try that one again. Her voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. This time I'll cry faster. On screen, Veronica practiced tears, checked her reflection, tried again. Daddy always said I was his emotional one, his sensitive girl. She adjusted her posture, started over. The judge watched in silence. The entire courtroom watched, and Veronica's mask began to crack. The video played for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of Veronica rehearsing grief, practicing manipulation, perfecting her performance. At one point, the recording showed her on the phone, laughing about how Dad probably didn't even know what he signed. Another clip showed her coaching herself. When they ask about Ruth, look down. Reluctance reads as honesty. The courtroom was completely silent except for Veronica's recorded voice, echoing off the walls, damning her with every practiced word. She tried to stop it, stood up, her own voice breaking for real now. Turn it off. Please, Your Honor, this is out of context. The judge looked at her coldly. Sit down, Miss Howard. Veronica sat. On screen, she was still going, still rehearsing, still proving every accusation I'd made. Her lawyer's face had gone gray. The spectators in the courtroom, mostly our family members who'd come to support Veronica, stared in shock. My cousin Bethany actually gasped when the clip showed Veronica practicing the exact hand gesture she'd used when touching the lawyer's arm. When the video finally ended, the judge removed her reading glasses and looked at Veronica with something close to disgust. "I've seen enough." The judge's ruling came 2 weeks later. The will was declared fraudulent, obtained through undue influence and coercion. All assets were frozen, pending complete review. Veronica's name was removed from every document pending investigation into potential criminal fraud. The house, the accounts, the investments, everything was returned to the estate to be properly divided according to Washington state intestacy laws, which meant everything would be split evenly between Veronica and me, the way it should have been from the start. I didn't smile when Miss Torres called with the news. Didn't celebrate. Just sat in my quiet apartment and breathed deeply for the first time in months. The house where I'd helped Dad replace the roof, update the electrical, maintain the garden, would be mine. Half of it, legally. The other half, Veronica could keep or sell. I didn't care anymore. What mattered was that Dad's real wishes, the ones he'd expressed before Veronica started manipulating him, had been honored. The truth had won, not through drama or confrontation, but through patience, documentation, and evidence. 3 days after the ruling, my phone buzzed with a text from Veronica. "I'm sorry things got messy. I hope we can move past this and rebuild our relationship. Family is important." I stared at those words for a long time. Sorry things got messy. Not sorry for lying. Not sorry for manipulating our dying father. Not sorry for trying to steal everything he'd worked for. Sorry things got messy. Sorry she got caught. I deleted the message without responding. Some people mistake silence for forgiveness, assume that not responding means you're open to reconciliation. They shouldn't make that assumption. My silence wasn't forgiveness. It was closure. The door closing on a relationship that had probably always been one-sided, built on my loyalty and her manipulation. She'd tried one more performance, the repentant sister seeking forgiveness. But I wasn't her audience anymore. She'd have to find someone else to watch her act. I blocked her number and went back to my life, lighter somehow, free of the weight I'd been carrying. I returned to Dad's house, my house now, legally and morally. The estate division would take months to finalize, but Miss Torres assured me I could begin the process of moving back in, reclaiming the space that had always felt like home. In the attic, I found boxes I'd forgotten existed. Dad's old papers, letters, memories stored away like treasures. In one box, underneath tax returns from the 1990s, I found a letter in Dad's handwriting. Not shaky, not uncertain, strong and clear, written years before his illness. "To whom it may concern, I want my daughter Ruth to have this house when I'm gone. She's the one who shows up, who cares, who makes this place a home. She doesn't ask for anything, never has, but she deserves everything." Dated 5 years ago, signed clearly, notarized by Mrs. Kowalski, who apparently had been a notary public before retiring. Legal, binding, undeniable. He'd known. Even then, healthy and strong, he'd known who would be there at the end, who would honor his memory rather than exploit it. I held that letter and finally cried, not from grief but from gratitude. He'd seen me, had always seen me. I stood in the doorway of what was now legally my home. Late afternoon sunlight flooding through the windows I'd helped Dad clean every spring. The house smelled like possibility, like new beginnings built on old foundations. In my office, I'd created a box labeled "For the Record." Inside, the Nest camera footage, all 40 rehearsals of Veronica's grief performance, the forged signatures and handwriting comparisons, the reconstructed envelope from the shredder, the recorded conversation with Mr. Pemberton, Denise's written statement about the eulogy practice, the journal photographs showing Veronica's manipulation guide, every piece of evidence that had won my case preserved for posterity. I'd never show it to anyone who didn't need to see it, never post it online for public shaming, but I'd keep it because truth deserved to be remembered. Veronica thought I wasn't watching, thought my silence meant I wasn't seeing, wasn't understanding, wasn't planning. She'd forgotten that quiet doesn't mean weak. That patience isn't the same as passivity. I closed the door to my office, turned toward the kitchen where Dad and I had shared so many meals, and whispered to the empty house, "She forgot the cameras were on." I never did. Then I walked forward into my future, built on truth, earned through patience, won through the simple act of documenting reality while others performed fiction.